The lobby of the Grandview Hotel looked exactly like what I'd expected from a mid-tier downtown Portland establishment, polished but worn. The kind of place business travelers chose when their company wanted to save money, but still maintain some dignity. Burgundy carpet with gold trim ran from entrance to the front desk, and the brass fixtures had that particular shine that suggested regular cleaning rather than quality. I'd walked past this building dozens of times during my 2 years at Portland State, never imagining I'd end up working here. Rebecca Davis stood behind the front desk, her auburn hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it might give her a headache. She had the kind of professional smile that hotel managers must practice in the mirror, warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to maintain authority. When I approached, she looked me up and down once, taking in my black slacks and burgundy button-up shirt, the uniform he'd bought specifically for this job. Dylan Martinez. That's me. Good. You're punctual. She glanced at her watch. Night shift starts at 11 o'clock and you'll have about an hour of overlap with me to learn the basics. This isn't a complicated job, but there are some specific protocols we follow. I pulled out a small notebook, the kind used for taking lecture notes. Rebecca noticed and nodded approvingly. The previous night manager left very detailed instructions. His name was Mr. Calhoun. Worked here for 2 years before stopped showing up about 3 weeks ago. Never called, never left any notice, just vanished. She paused, running her finger along the edge of a manila folder. He was particular about certain procedures, but they kept things running smoothly during the overnight hours. Rebecca opened the folder and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper. Even from where I stood, I could see he had a numbered list in neat, precise handwriting. She slid it across the marble countertop toward me. Mr. Calhoun insisted that every night-shift employee followed these rules exactly. No exceptions, no modifications. I don't pretend to understand all of them, but we haven't had any major incidents since he implemented them, so we maintain his system. I picked up the laminated list. At the top, in block letters, someone had written night shift protocols, mandatory compliance. Below that, 6 rules were listed in some careful handwriting. 1. Never use the elevator between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. 2. All guests must be in their rooms by 1 a.m. No exceptions. 3. Room 371 stays empty. Do not book under any circumstances. 4. Remain in office from 3:13 a.m. to 3:21 a.m. Do not leave for any reason. 5. Do not allow Charlie inside to Billicky. 6. Check salt line at 5:01 a.m. Repair if necessary. I read through the list twice, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. The first rule seemed reasonable enough. Older elevators could be unreliable, and maintenance probably didn't want anyone getting stuck overnight. The second rule made business sense. 2. Preventing noise complaints from late arrivals disturbing other guests. But the rest of them felt increasingly strange. Salt line? I asked. Rebecca walked around the desk and pointed toward the lobby entrance. Near the glass doors running in a straight line across the burgundy carpet was what looked like a thin stripe of white powder. I'd noticed it when I walked in, but assumed it was some kind of decorative element, or maybe residue from recent cleaning. Mr. Doc Calhoun maintained that line every night. It's salt. He insisted it was essential for security purposes. Rebecca's tone suggested she found this as peculiar as I did, but had given up questioning it. He left detailed instructions for mixing an application in the office, and Charlie, former maintenance worker, got fired about 6 months ago for drinking on the job. But he still shows up sometimes, usually drunk trying to get inside. Mr. Calhoun was very specific about not letting him in. Chesterton, a stack of registration cards. Look, I know these rules seem mad, but they work. The night shift has been problem-free since Mr. Calhoun established these protocols. Just follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. I folded the laminated sheet and slipped it into my shirt pocket. The job paid $15 an hour, which was 3 more than me previous job at the campus bookstore, and I only needed to work 3 nights a week to cover my rent and textbooks. Weird rules seemed like a reasonable trade-off. Rebecca spent the next 40 minutes showing me the basics. The computer system was straightforward, mostly just checking guests in and out, handling wake-up call requests, and dealing with the occasional noise complaint. She showed me how to access the maintenance request system, though. She mentioned that most serious issues would wait until morning when James Wilson, the day maintenance worker, came in. The office behind the front desk was small but functional, with a desk, filing cabinet, and a small refrigerator that buzzed quietly in the corner. The overnight shift is usually quiet, Rebecca explained, as she gathered her things. Most of our guests are business travelers who turn in early. You might get a few stragglers checking in late, but nothing too challenging. Just remember, no matter what happens, follow Mr. Calhoun's rules. Exactly by midnight, I was alone in the lobby. The Grandview Hotel settled into its nighttime quiet. The kind of institutional stillness that seemed to make every small sound louder. The heating system clicked on and off with mechanical regularity. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed with a soft thud off heavy wood. Outside, occasional footsteps bounced off the sidewalk as late-night pedestrians made their way through downtown Portland. I spread my economics textbook open on the front desk and tried to focus on supply and demand curves, but my attention kept drifting to the strange rules in my pocket. Room 371 stays empty. Why that specific room? And what kind of security concern required a line of salt across the lobby floor? I'd worked at enough part-time jobs to know that managers put policies in place without good reasons, even if those reasons weren't immediately clear to employees. At 12:30 a.m., a middle-aged businessman checked in late, apologizing for his delayed flight. He seemed tired but polite, and I handed him his keycard without any complications. By 1 a.m., the lobby was completely empty except for me. I locked the front doors as Rebecca had instructed and settled back into my studying. The hours passed slowly. At 2 a.m., I took a break from economics to walk around the lobby, stretching my legs and getting used to the space. The salt line ran perfectly straight from one side of the entrance to the other, about 3 feet from the glass doors. Up close, I could see it was regular table salt applied thick enough to be clearly visible against the dark carpet. Someone had taken considerable care to make it even and unbroken. When 3:13 a.m. approached, I remembered the fourth rule and went back to the office. I closed the door and sat at the desk, watching the minutes tick by on my phone. 3:13, 3:14, 3:15. The building remained perfectly quiet. I heard nothing unusual. No sounds that would explain why Mr. Calhoun had insisted on this particular 8-minute isolation period. By 3:21, I felt slightly foolish for following such a specific and apparently pointless instruction. But I'd been hired to follow procedures, not question them. The rest of the night passed without incident. I finished 2 chapters of economics reading and started outlining my upcoming paper on market equilibrium. A few times, I looked toward the elevator, remembering the first rule, but I had no reason to use it anyway. All the guest rooms were accessible by stairs, and I wasn't planning to leave the lobby level. At 5 a.m., I approached the salt line for my requited inspection. It looked exactly as it had when I'd examined it earlier. Straight, unbroken, and precisely applied. I checked the ends where it met the walls, looking for gaps or disturbances, but found nothing that required repair. Whatever Mr. Calhoun's reasons for maintaining this line, it seemed to be holding up fine on its own. As dawn light began filtering through the lobby's glass doors, I realized I'd successfully completed my first night shift at the Grandview Hotel. The rules had seemed strange when Rebe explained them, but following them had been simple enough. No guests had tried to use the elevator. Everyone had been in their rooms. By 1 a.m., room 371 hadn't been requested. No one named Charlie had appeared. The mysterious 8-minute office period had passed quietly. The salt line remained intact. I gathered my textbook and notes, feeling confident about the job, whatever Mr. Calhoun's reasons for establishing these protocols. They'd kept the night shift running smoothly, and I could handle strange rules if it meant steady income and quiet study time. The work seemed manageable, even with its peculiarities. I walked into the Grandview Hotel lobby feeling much more confident than I had 4 nights earlier. Rebecca had left her usual stack of paperwork on the front desk, along with a note about a broken coffee maker in the third-floor break room that would need attention from James in the morning. Everything felt routine, manageable. I settled into the desk chair, pulled out my political science textbook, and checked the clock. Jumps a blast low at Paplu 2 p.m. The night stretched ahead of me, predictable and calm. The lobby kept its institutional quiet, the same gentle buzz of heating systems and distant traffic that had provided the soundtrack to my first shift. I made my way through 2 chapters on congressional voting patterns, occasionally looking up when I heard footsteps on the sidewalk outside, or the distant ding of the elevator serving the day shift's final guests. By midnight, the building had settled into the same peaceful stillness I remembered from before. I was highlighting a passage about partisan polarization when the glass doors chimed with someone's approach. A woman in her 30s stood outside well-dressed in a charcoal business suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, even at this late hour. She carried a small leather overnight bag and moved with the confident stride of some ENA's 2 late arrivals. I unlocked the doors and stepped aside to let her enter. "Good evening. Checking in, Sarah Thompson," She approached the desk with efficiency, her blue eyes scanning the lobby with obvious familiarity. I need room 371. I felt my stomach drop slightly. Room 371 stays empty. No exceptions. That had been the third rule on Mr. Calhoun's list, stated clearly and without explanation. I pulled up the reservation system on the computer, hoping to find her booking under a different room number. But no. Reservation appeared under Thompson at Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't see a reservation under that name. And room 371 isn't available. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She leaned forward slightly, placing both hands flat on the marble countertop. I specifically requested that room. You'll always stay in that room when I'm in Portland. The room is out of service and definitely, I can offer you a comparable room on the 3rd floor, or we have several nice options on the 4th floor with city views. I don't want a comparable room. Her voice remained level, but there was an edge to it now that made me uncomfortable. I want room 371. I looked down at the laminated rule sheet in my shirt pocket, then back at Sarah's calm face. Mr. Calhoun had been very specific about this particular rule. No exceptions, no modifications. I'm sorry, but that room really isn't available. Company policy. Sarah smiled then, and the expression didn't reach her eyes at all. It was that kind of smile that suggested she found my adherence to policy amusing rather than admirable. The rules don't apply to me. Something about the way she said it made my hands feel cold. Not I'm a VIP guest or I have special status. Just a flat statement that the rules, whatever they were, somehow didn't apply to her. I looked at her for a long moment, trying to process the complete certainty in her voice. Ma'am, I really can't. Room 371. She reached into her purse and placed a credit card on the counter. Now, I found myself reaching for a keycard almost before I realized what I was doing. My hands moved automatically through the check-in process while my brain struggled to catch up. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to follow the rules exactly, no exceptions. But Sarah's expectation felt so complete, so certain, that refusing seemed impossible. The keycard programming machine beeped softly as it encoded room 371's access. I slid theckered across the counter towards Sarah, already regretting the decision, but unable to figure out how to reverse it. Thank you. Sarah pocketed the keycard and turned toward the elevator without another word. She didn't ask about breakfast times or Wi-Fi passwords or any of the usual questions late arriving guests posed. She simply walked away, her heels clicking against the burgundy carpet with mechanical precision. I watched her press the elevator call button and disappear behind the closing doors. Feeling nervous for some reason I couldn't explain. I'd broken one of Mr. Calhoun's rules within an hour of starting my second shift, and I had no idea why. Something about Sarah's presence had made refusal feel impossible, as though the option simply didn't exist. The rest of the hour passed in uncomfortable reflection. I tried to return to my political science reading, but the words blurred together as I replayed the conversation. Sarah had known exactly which room she entered, had expected resistance, and had somehow made my compliance feel inevitable. The more I thought about it, the more wrong the entire interaction felt. At 2 a.m., I was deep in an unsuccessful attempt to focus on electoral college mechanics when movement outside their glass doors caught my attention. A man stood on the sidewalk, swaying slightly, his face pressed close to the glass. He was maybe 50 years old, with several days of gray stubble and clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and his eyes had the bloodshot appearance of someone who'd been drinking heavily. He knocked on the glass with the heel of his hand, the sound carrying through the quiet lobby. Hey, open up. I work here. He upped the doors carefully, remembering the 5th rule. Do not allow Charlie inside the building. This had Tobe Chowie, the fired maintenance worker Rebecca had mentioned, the one Mr. Calhoun had been specific about keeping out. We're closed, I called through the glass. You'll need to come back during business hours. I work here. You idiot. I'm supposed to be here. Charlie's voice was muffled by the glass, but clearly agitated. Open the damn door. The hotel is closed to non-guests. Between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. I can't let you in. Charlie's face darkened, and he pressed both hands against the glass, leaving smudged prints on the surface. You don't understand. I belong here. This place, it needs me. I keep it. His words slurred together, but his eyes had a focused intensity that seemed at odds with his appearance and sicken. Just open the door, just for a minute. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Charlie stared at me through the glass for a long moment, his expression changing from anger to something that looked almost like hunger. He opened his mouth to say something else, and then he was gone. Not gone as in he walked away or stumbled off into the night. Gone, as in he was standing there 1 second, and the empty sidewalk was visible the next. No movement, not transition, just there then, not there. As though someone had simply erased him from Thessaly. I stood frozen at the glass doors, staring. At the spot where Charlie had been standing, the handprints he'd left on the glass remained, clear evidence that he'd been real, but the sidewalk beyond showed no trace of his presence. No footprints, no movement in either direction, nothing to suggest where he might have gone, or how he disappeared so completely. I checked the street in both directions, looking for any sign of him, but the sidewalk remained empty, except for the occasional late-night pedestrian walking. Past blocks away, Charlie had simply vanished, mid-car in conversation, leaving me standing at the locked doors. The clock in the front desk showed 2:17 a.m. when I finally backed away from the entrance and returned to my chair. I tried to convince myself that I'd been mistaken, that Charlie had simply moved out of my line of sight faster than I'd noticed, but the memory of his disappearance felt too clear and sudden to explain away. He'd been there, pressing against the glass, demanding entry, and then he'd been nowhere. I tried to return to my studying, but concentration proved impossible. Instead, I found myself looking repeatedly toward the glass doors, half expecting to see Charlie's face preset against them again. The lobby felt different now, less like a quiet sanctuary and more like a place where strange things happened according to rules I didn't understand. The digital clock on the computer screen read 3:12 a.m. when I remembered the fourth rule and gathered my textbook to retreat to the office. I'd forgotten about the mandatory 8-minute isolation period until the last possible second. Distracted by thoughts of Sarah's confident demand and Charlie's impossible disappearance, I closed the office door behind me and settled into the desk chair. Just as the clock clicked over to 3:13, the howling started immediately. It erupted from somewhere deep in the building, not from any specific direction I could identify, but as though it came from the walls themselves. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Simultaneously animal and mechanical, a sustained note that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into my bones. It was the kind of sound that made every instinct scream to run to get as far away as possible, as quickly as possible, but as quickly as possible. The lights flickered with each crescendo, and I could feel the desk chair trembling beneath me. The howling rose and fell in waves, sometimes dropping to a low rumble that I felt more than heard, sometimes climbing to a pitch that made my teeth ache. Through it all, the building itself seemed to shudder as though something massive was moving through its structure. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white against the dark wood, and forced myself to stay seated. The rule was specific. Remain in the office from 3:13 to 3:21. No matter what. Mr. Calhoun had emphasized this particular instruction, and after the night's earlier violations of his protocol, I was determined to follow at least this one correctly. The howling continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Windows rattled in their frames. The fluorescent light above the desk buzzed and flickered. Somewhere in the building, I could hear doors slamming. Foul weather from the vibrations or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. At 3:21 exactly, the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt almost as oppressive as the howling had been. My ears rang in the sudden quiet, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The building settled around me with a series of small creaks and clicks, like a house cooling after a hot day, and the fluorescent light steadied into its normal steady buzz. I remained in the office for another few minutes, waiting to see if howling would resume, but the building stayed quiet. When I finally penned the door and stepped back into the lobby, everything appeared exactly as I'd left it. The computer screen still displayed my political science notes. My pen lay where I dropped it on the counter. The glass doors were lobbies, interior lighting, showing no signs of disturbance. The phone rang. I jumped at the sound, my nerves still raw from the experience in the office. The caller ID showed an internal extension. Room 371. Front desk. This is Dylan there scratching at my door. Sarah's voice sounded different over the phone. Flatter. More mechanical than it had during our earlier conversation. It's been going on for several minutes. A test now. Constant scratching like claws on wood. I felt my stomach sink. Of course, there was a problem with room 371. I'd broken Mr. Calhoun's rules by letting Sarah check into that specific room. And no, something was wrong. I'll come up and take a look. Which floor are you on? 3rd floor, room 3871. The line went dead before I could respond. I locked the front desk drawer and took the master key ring from its hook behind the counter. The elevator waited across the lobby, its brass doors reflecting the overhead lighting, but the first rule bounced around in my mind. Never use the elevator. Between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. I pushed through the stairwell door instead and began climbing toward the third floor. The stairwell was dimly lit and my footsteps bounced with each step. By the second floor landing, I could hear something rhythmic scratching sound coming from somewhere above me. It had the steady, persistent quality of an animal trying to dig through wood, sharp and deliberate. The sound grew louder as he climbed to the third floor, until it seemed to fill the entire stairwell. I opened the door to the third floor hallway, and the scratching stopped immediately. The hallway stretched ahead of me, lit by fluorescent fixtures that cast everything in harsh white light. Room 371 was at the far end, and I could see its door clearly from where I stood. The scratching had definitely been coming from this direction. But now the floor was completely silent. I walked slowly down the carpeted hallway, listening for any sign of movement, but heard nothing except the distant buzz off the building's ventilation system. When I reached room 371, I knocked gently on the door. "Miss Thompson, this is Dylan from the front desk." No response. I knocked again, louder this time. "Miss Thompson, you called about scratching." Still nothing. I used the master key to unlock the door and pushed it open slowly. The room was completely dark, but enough light came in from the hallway to show me that it was empty. Not just unoccupied, empty. No luggage, no personal belongings, no sign that anyone had ever checked in. The bed was made perfectly. The sofa were dust-free and the bathroom showed no evidence of use. I turned on the overhead light and checked more thoroughly. The closet was empty. The bathroom was spotless. There was no indication that Sarah Thompson had ever been in this room, even though I'd personally handed her the keycard less than 3 hours earlier. I stood in the doorway trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Sarah had definitely taken the elevator to this floor. She definitely called from this room's phone, but she was nowhere to be found, and the room looked as though it had been professionally cleaned and left vacant. The scratching sound started again. This time it was coming from inside the walls, a steady scraping that seemed to move from one side of the room to the other. I could hear it clearly now. Not claws on wood, but something harder, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the inside of the drywall. I backed out of the room quickly, pulling the door closed behind me, and returned to the lobby as fast as the stairs would carry me. The scratching sound followed me down to flights, growing fainter with each floor, but never stopping completely. Only when I was back at the front desk did the building return to its previous silence. The rest of the night passed in nervous washing. I couldn't concentrate on my studying, couldn't stop glancing toward the elevator doors, couldn't shake the image of that empty room that should have contained a guest. Every small sound made me jump. The heating system cycling on a car passing outside, the distant settling of the building's old structure. At 5 a.m., I made my required inspection of the salt line. The white stripe that had been perfectly intact during my first shift was now broken in 3 places. The gaps were clean and precise, as though someone had carefully swept portions away rather than accidentally disturbing them. Each break was roughly 6 in wide, creating openings in what was supposed to be an unbroken barrier. One found the salt supplies in the supply closet behind the front desk, exactly where Rebecca had indicated they would be. Mr. Calhoun had left detailed instructions for mixing an application, written in the same precise handwriting as the rule list. The process was simple but specific. Table salt mixed with what the instructions labeled as blessed salt in a 3-to-1 ratio, applied in a straight line exactly 3 feet from the entrance. I worked carefully to repair each break, making sure the line was continuous and even. The salt felt normal, just salt. But there was something reassuring about following Mr. Calhoun's precise instructions. Whatever the purpose of this barrier was, maintaining it felt important in a way I couldn't explain. By the time Rebecca arrived at 7 a.m., the salt line was restored and the lobby looked exactly as it should. I'd removed Sarah Thompson's the computer system, though I wasn't sure why. Room 371 showed as vacant and unavailable, just as it was supposed to. The night's events felt surreal in the morning light, like a strange dream that becomes harder to believe the more awake you become. But the repaired salt line was real. The broken registration was real. And somewhere in the building's silence, I could still hear the faint sound of that impossible howling. I walked out of the Grandview Hotel that morning with my head buzzing, from too much coffee and not enough sleep. Rebecca had accepted my brief explanation about the broken salt line without much interest. Legit, under the general category of Calhoun's weird maintenance requirements. But the night's events wouldn't leave me alone as I drove home through downtown Portland's awakening streets. Sarah Thompson's disappearance, Charlie's impossible vanishing act, that empty room that should have contained a guest. None of it made sense within any framework I understood. Instead of heading straight back to my apartment, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Portland Public Library's Central Branch. The building wouldn't open for another hour, but I sat in my car and looked at the brick front, trying to decide if I was being paranoid or just curious. Something was clearly wrong with the Grandview Hotel, and Mr. Calhoun's rules weren't random safety protocols. They were defenses against something specific. When Thelby doors opened at 9 a.m., I was waiting outside with a cup of gas station coffee and a growing need for answers. The reference librarian, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and reading glasses on a chain, directed me to the local history section without asking why I needed information about downtown. I settled into a corner table with a stack of city directories, newspaper chips, and historical surveys, spreading them out like evidence in a case I didn't yet understand. The Grandview Hotel had been built in 1924. According to the building permits I found in the city records, the address had previously housed the Marlowe boarding house, a 3-story wooden structure that served temporary workers and travelers from 1897 until it was torn down in 1923. I almost missed the significance until I started digging deeper into the newspaper archives from that period. The Marlowe boarding house had experienced what the papers delicately termed a series of unfortunate incidents between 1902 and 1908. 7 people had died on the premises during those 6 years, not from fire or structural collapse, but from what the articles described as unexplained circumstances. 3 guests had simply been found dead in their rooms with no apparent cause. 2 others had disappeared entirely, leaving behind their possessions, but no trace of where they'd gone. 1 had been discovered at the bottom of the stairwell, with injuries that didn't match a simple fall. The final death had been the owner himself, found in his office with what the coroner reported as signs of extreme agitation, but no clear cause of death. The boarding house had closed permanently in 1908, remaining empty for 15 years before the lot was cleared for the hotel's construction. I copied down the dates and details, me handwriting getting messier as the pattern became clearer. Whatever had been wrong with that original building, the new hotel seemed to have inherited the problem. I found the Grandview Hotel's employment records in a different archive, cross-referenced with newspaper want ads and business license renewals. The pattern was unmistakable, and I knew to look for it. Night managers rarely lasted more than 6 months. The job seemed to turn over constantly, with brief periods that suggested people weren't just finding better opportunities. They were running away. Mr. Calhoun's 2-year employment was genuinely unusual. Most of his predecessors had quit within weeks. One had lasted only 4 nights before walking away mid-shift, leaving behind a resignation letter that simply read, "I can't do this anymore." Another had disappeared entirely, much like Calhoun himself, leaving behind only a brief note about needing to get away from this place. The guest complaints were harder to track down, scattered across decades of newspaper archives and buried in city council meeting minutes, but they formed a consistent thread. Reports of strange noises during overnight hours, claims of doors opening and closing on their own, guests who insisted their rooms had been occupied by someone else while they were away. Hotel management had consistently dismissed these reports as urban legends or the result of an aging building's quirks. One article from 1987 particularly caught my attention. A guest named Robert Chun had told reporters about encountering what he described as former hotel employees who tried to convince him to break basic safety rules. He'd been warned not to use the elevator after midnight, but claimed to staff members that encouraged him to ignore the restriction. When he'd asked the day manager about these employees, she'd insisted no such people worked at the hotel. Chun had checked out early and refused to provide further details. He photocopied everything I could find and left the library with a folder full of documentation that painted a picture I didn't want to believe. The Grandview Hotel wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. And it had been dangerous for a very long time. Mr. Calhoun's rules weren't arbitrary protocols, but hard-won knowledge about how to survive in a place that seemed to feed on people who broke its infrastructure. I spent the afternoon trying to study for my upcoming economics exam, but my mind kept drifting back to the research materials spread across my kitchen table. The pattern was too clear to ignore, too consistent across too many years to dismiss. As coincidence, whatever was happening at the hotel, it had been happening for over a century, and people like Mr. Calhoun had been fighting it one night, move at a time. When I arrived at the hotel that evening for my 3rd move, James Wilson was replacing a burned-out hallway light on the 2nd floor. I'd seen him around during the day, move transitions, but never actually spoken to him. He was a solidly built man in his 40s with calloused hands, and the kind of patient expression that suggested he'd seen most of what the building could throw at him. "You're the new night guy," he said, looking down at me from his stepladder. Dylan. Right. That's me. How'd ya know Rebecca mentioned you? James climbed down and gathered his tools into a worn canvas bag. You settling in? Okay? Night shift? Can't be challenging her. Something in his tone made me pause. He wasn't making small talk about difficult schedules or dealing with drunk guests. There was something more behind his words, the same careful consideration I'd heard in Rebecca's voice when she'd talked about Mr. Calhoun's rules. It's been interesting so far. I'm curious about Mr. Calhoun. What was he like before he disappeared? James glanced around the empty hallway, then moved closer and lowered his voice. Calhoun was a good guy when he started. Quiet, professional, took the job seriously. But toward the end, man, he got paranoid. Wouldn't take breaks, wouldn't leave the building during his shifts. Kept talking about how the hotel was feeding on people who broke the rules. James shook his head. I thought he was having some kind of breakdown. Turns out, maybe he was just paying attention. What do you mean? Night managers don't last there. Never have. Most people quit fast, but the ones who stick around, they start seeing things, hearing things. Calhoun lasted longer than most, but it got to him eventually. He kept saying the building was alive somehow, that it needed people to break the rules, so it could consume them. James hefted his tool bag onto his shoulder. Sounds crazy when you say it out loud, but Calhoun wasn't crazy. He was scared. Do you think something happened to him? I think he figured out too much and couldn't handle it anymore. The night before he cornered me during shift change and made me promise to watch out for whoever replaced him. Said the hotel would try to claim them, too. But maybe someone could break the pattern if they knew what they were fighting. James headed toward the stairwell, then paused and looked back at me. Follow his rules exactly, Dylan. Don't try to be a hero. Don't think you can outsmart whatever's in this place. Just do the job and stay safe. By 11 p.m., I was alone in the lobby with my political science textbook and a growing sense of worry. The research from Themmening had given context to the hotel's strangeness, but context didn't make the experience any less troubling. If anything, knowing about the Marlowe boarding house's history made every small sound feel more threatening. Every shadow seemed deeper. The night went normally until 1:30 a.m. when a guest stumbled out of the stairwell and approached the front. Desi was obviously drunk, probably in his 30s, wearing a rumpled business suit and carrying a briefcase that he kept dropping. His hotel keycard dangled from a lanyard around his neck, and he moved with the exaggerated care of someone trying to appear sober. Elevator's not working, he announced, slurring his words slightly. Need to get to the 4th floor. The elevator's out of service overnight. You'll need to use the stairs. Stairs are too. He gestured vaguely, apparently unable to find the right word. Just fix the elevator. I'm a steer. I watched him walk unsteadily toward the elevator bay, where he jabbed repeatedly at the call button. Tebaton lit up each time he pressed it, shining bright orange in the dimly lit lobby. But the doors remained closed. He kept pressing it, growing more agitated with each failed attempt. It's broken, he called back to me. The light comes on, but nothing happens. Use the stairs, sir. They're right behind you. I paid for an elevator. He continued pressing the button. With increasing frequency, his movements becoming more desperate. The orange light blinked on and off like a warning signal. But the doors never opened, never even registered the call with their usual mechanical sounds. After 5 minutes of trying to push buttons, the guest gave up and stumbled back toward the stairwell, muttering complaints about hotel maintenance and false advertising. I watched him disappear through the fire door, then walked over to test the elevator myself. The call button worked perfectly. The door opened immediately when I pressed it, showing the normal mirrored interior and brass fixtures. Whatever had stopped it from responding to the drunk guest, it wasn't a mechanical failure. The elevator had simply refused to work for someone who was trying to break the first rule. I went back to the front desk feeling more worried than the situation should have made me. The elevator wasn't just covered by a policy. It was somehow enforcing that policy on its own. The building itself was helping to maintain Mr. Calhoun's protective barriers. When 3:13 a.m. got close, I grabbed my textbook and went to the office with a bad feeling that had gotten stronger each night. The howling from my second shift hadn't been a one-time thing. It was a regular occurrence, something that happened every night during those 8 important minutes. I closed the office door and sat in the desk chair. Watching the digital clock in the computer screen change to 3:13. The howling started right away, just like before. But tonight, it wasn't alone. Heavy footsteps carried through the building above me, moving with clear purpose across what sounded like the 3rd floor. The footsteps were too heavy for a guest, too regular to be someone stumbling around in the dark. They moved from one end of the building to the other in a steady rhythm, like someone was pacing the hallway or doing a methodical search. I tried to focus on the computer screen, but the security camera monitor in the corner of the office caught my attention. The feeds from the different floors, which normally showed empty hallways lit by fluorescent lights, had turned to. Every camera displayed the same interference pattern, making it impossible to see what was actually happening in the building during those 8 minutes. The howling reached its usual peak while the footsteps continued their relentless pace above me. The office walls seemed to shake with each sound, and I could feel the desk trembling under my hands. Whatever was happening in the building during this period, it was happening everywhere at once. In the elevator shaft, in the hallways, possibly in the rooms themselves. At 3:21 exactly, both sounds stopped. The security cameras came back to life, showing empty hallways and normal lighting. The building settled into its previous quiet with a series of small creaks and sighs, and I had been gripping the edge of the desk hard now to leave marks in the wood. I waited several minutes before opening the office door, listening for any sign thought the disturbance might start again. When I finally stepped back into the lobby, everything looked normal. The computer screen still displayed my political science notes,